Hello, my name's Dr. Zoe Walkington from the Open University, and I'm here today to talk to you about a piece of qualitative research that myself, my colleague Graham Pike and other collaborators from within the centre, including police practitioners, were involved with regard to the police use of Facebook sites. And we just really wanted to tell you a little bit about the study and what we found. So the first thing that's noticeable about the police use of Facebook sites is that it's really rapidly increased since about 2008, the late 2000s. There's been a sudden use of Facebook that we didn't really see previously. And despite that, there hasn't been a great deal of research into how that is actually being used and what its impacts are. And in particular, there's a real lack of research that looks at this qualitatively, so that looks at the kind of language that the police are using and what that kind of language is actually doing. And that's what we set out to do with a couple of partner forces in this particular research project. So there are a few ways where police use of Facebook has some obvious advantages, and one of those is actually about real-time policing. So the police are able to communicate through Facebook about incidents that either are happening or maybe reassure public that there are incidents that are rumoured to be happening but actually aren't happening. So there's that sort of positive impact. But there's also the opportunity for the police to communicate with the community through Facebook, and those sorts of communications can have a particular impact on how their identity is actually viewed. Another of the potential advantages of the police use of Facebook is that it allows the police to talk directly to the community and tell their own stories directly. Now that differs to what used to happen in the past. If you think about the police's use of media, traditional media such as newspapers or particular news channels, whenever they use those traditional media, it gives those traditional media the opportunity to frame the story in a particular way. So you can see that Facebook allows the police to communicate more directly and bypass any bias or particular frame that the traditional news media might want to put on that story. Okay, so what did we find in this study, in this analysis that we carried out? Well, the first thing that we found out is that stories told on social media are definitely no longer linear. We tend to think of a story as having a clear start point and then a temporal order through to the end of the story. But when stories are told on social media, they're not like that. They tend to be told in very fragmented ways. So the police might start a story, but then the commenting public take the story up, and they might add in backstory, they might add in different elements, they might expand the temporal order of what's actually been told by the police. And that leads us on to our second point, which is that stories on Facebook are told very collaboratively. So it's not down to the police as the holder or owner of a particular story to just go ahead and tell it and expect their audience to listen. The audience are really involved in the co-creation of the story. They collaborate in how it's told. And when the police make decisions about what stories to post, they quite often face criticism or critique from the public about why they chose to make that particular editorial decision to run that story over and above another story. So you start to get this sense of, well, who actually owns the story anyway? Who's entitled to tell it? And you get this sense that there are a lot of people involved in these stories. It's very much a collaborative event. A third finding is that we tend to notice in these police Facebook sites that the new media that they're using is still being treated as if it's old media. This is a finding that not just we have found, but that's been found actually internationally in other research as well. And what I mean by that is that the police are tending to use social media to put out something which looks quite like a press release. So perhaps it's a story that they're putting out, but they're not then using the functionality of the social media and the social networking site to further interact with the commenting public and the community. So it's a one-way interaction most of the time. They're putting out a story, but what that means is that the story is then completed by the commenting public. So in a way, the opportunity for having engagement online that social media affords is actually not being capitalised on at the moment through police use of Facebook sites. Another really interesting thing that we noticed was that the comments of the public actually form really useful feedback for police forces. And this is kind of informal feedback, not obtained through a traditional sort of research agenda, but it really gives the police a good idea of how they're being viewed in a particular locality, what they think, what the public think of them. And in addition, we noticed that we heard quite a lot of minority voices through Facebook. So it gives people the opportunity who maybe wouldn't get involved in providing formal feedback through a traditional research agenda or survey carried out by the police. We noticed that all sorts of people get involved in commenting on Facebook. And so it's a really good opportunity to gather feedback from absolutely everyone, no matter which part of society they are from. The other thing that we noticed is that people are really engaged in their willingness to provide feedback and to comment on police stories. And in a lot of ways, this kind of shows that the community really cares about policing and really cares about the policing agenda. What we noticed in our analysis was that there was quite a lot of people who commented really quite minimally, maybe just liking the post or saying well done to the particular force in question, or perhaps not saying well done, perhaps saying something more critical, but in a very minimal way. But we also noticed there were a lot of people that commented really at some length, doing things like telling their own related stories as a way of probably allowing them as being an authoritative voice on that particular story, allowing them to be seen as having a right to comment. But the point is that people are putting in quite a considerable effort in terms of how they actually are prepared to interact with the police through these social media sites. Perhaps unsurprisingly, one of the other things we found was that the relationships between the commenting members of the public on these Facebook sites quickly descended into being quite rude to each other. Now, this is no surprise for online environments, and most of you that have ever looked at YouTube, for example, will be familiar with people quite often being quite rude to each other, and certainly much ruder than you might expect to see if people were interacting face to face to discuss police practice, for example. What's interesting about that, of course, is that all of these comments linger on the Facebook site, and because there is no further interaction with the police in an awful lot of cases, they are kind of left telling the story. And so what we're left with is this kind of sense of people having fallen out on the organisational site. So, to move on to some conclusions then. Well, one of the reasons this is important, well, it's important because this kind of online talk shapes the discourse about policing, and it therefore shapes how safe we might feel, how willing we might be to go and speak to police officers. And those sorts of relationships are really important. I suppose what I'm saying is that identity work is being done on these sites, but often the identity work is actually being done mainly by the community because of the lack of that kind of dyadic interaction. It's also important because it's a form of feedback, it's a form of informal feedback. And actually what people are saying is important to the police forces, that they know what people are saying. Without doubt, austerity has been a major factor here, and police forces are very stretched, and it is understandable that they haven't been able to devote more time, money and resource to people working on social media sites to be able to make them more interactive. And I'm certainly aware that this is now on the police agenda in terms of them wanting to put this right. But I think the main recommendation that we would make as a result of having done this research is that experimenting with a more dialogic way of speaking to people through Facebook could be a massive asset to the police. It's too early at the moment to say how this should best be done, but it's really exciting to think about the possibilities for a kind of online community policing that could arise as a result of effective use of Facebook by police forces.